Jaymee J, it's so good to have you back on Unbroken. We recently did an interview on narcissism, which, by the way, a lot of people found really helpful. And I know we wanted to sort of continue that conversation specifically with how narcissism and pedophilia kind of come together and work together. So good to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back, Max. After the last show, I was like, oh, we just barely went across the surface of pedophilia and narcissism and how deeply it really connects. And it's kind of interesting because all of this pedophilia has been exposed in society, and of course, it's been going on since forever.
Yeah.
And I always kind of wonder, how much it's really increased because I do think it's really connected to narcissism. So, and the way that they're trying to normalize it too, and kind of like it seems like it possibly may have gone up in numbers than maybe in history it was like a smaller group of people that would have, been doing that as their like kind of like religious practice or whatever. But in today's society, like even with the pornography and everything, just going to like younger ages and I'll talk about the pornography a little bit later too, because it's also really highly connected to promoting both pedophilia and narcissism. Even if it's quote unquote, air quotes, regular porn, it all promotes narcissism, which promotes pedophilia. So it's like they're kind of using it to sort of connect these things and promote them and normalize them all kind of as a group.
Okay. So, I'm wondering here, like, probably not all narcissists are pedophiles, but are all pedophiles narcissists?
I think so. In my
Okay.
opinion, somebody might disagree with that, but I don't think one's really possible without the other. Because if you think about what, in order to commit an act of pedophilia, it's like there needs to be this sense of entitlement. There needs to be a sense of using the other person as an object with no consideration for their well-being, where you're and it's not even a need, it's just an indulgence or something you would like to have. It's like the fact that somebody would even be able to destroy somebody's entire life in order to gratify an urge they had. I mean, that just shows you how much they value the person that they're performing that act on as an innocent child. So, I mean, I don't believe that would be possible without being like sociopathic and a narcissist to even ever perform that act at all. Although they do have, they are deceived in their own mind. Like they have really weird ideas in their mind, how they rationalize what they're doing or minimize or deny kind of the reality of what they're doing to that child. And there's kind of a spectrum of like, obviously in somebody that's using it for programming or SRA knows full well the effect it's going to have on the child, whereas kind of lower down on the spectrum, that person might like really rationalize that they're not really hurting the child or, so it's like there's kind of a continuum of the level of evil that can go along with it, but I don't think any of it's possible without narcissism.
Yeah, no, that's actually was going to be my question. So you kind of answered it. And maybe we can delineate. There are different levels or kinds of pedophiles, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the kind we have talked about in the past are the top of the pyramid people, right? The people that run the world, that have the power and the wealth and the fame and all that, who run the agencies and the governments and all that. So these people, the satanic elite, as we call them, they deliberately use pedophilia to fragment children so they can program these altars. And then people have this multi-layered sort of DID system in there. And then certain altars will be used, like, you could program an altar to be a sex kitten and to know how to service adults and all this other stuff. But then there's also kind of what we would call maybe regular people, pedophiles, who, so what do you think about that, those two categories? And are there other categories, in your opinion, of pedophiles?
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. That's a really, really important point. So I think there is kind of the two categories, and I think they sort of coincide with the covert or the overt, like the arrogant or the vulnerable narcissist. And I'll elaborate on that a little bit. But then within those kind of two major categories, there's kind of a continuum in there. So, and then there can be somebody who kind of like has traits, but that wouldn't be like their full personality. So it kind of gets distilled out along the continuum. But going back to the sort of the overt, arrogant narcissist who's very aggressive, extreme sense of entitlement, no shame about taking what they want at the expense of others. Like, I mean, that would be the satanic elite in our society. Is like they're absolutely just it's just pure taking. There's no conscience. It's aggressive. They're like, you know, they're stealing kids, they're breeding kids. There's no shame in it. They feel completely entitled to take whatever they're able to take, and then they're using it on purpose in order to create slaves, is what they're doing, which again is just another aspect of the narcissist is wanting to use other people for their own means and ends, right? And then there's kind of the vulnerable narcissist who's maybe passive aggressive, insecure, you know, isn't going to be so overt or arrogant. They're going to be kind of the kind of sneaky person who's going to be, you know, abusing their wives, stepchildren or school teacher, or somebody who, you know, is going to be that passive aggressive covert person who's going to come across as like a harmless person who's, you know, would never hurt a child, who's normally really good with kids. And, you know, so they have this whole kind of way of being kind of a snake in the grass, right? And they also get off on that, right? Like that's part of the thrill for them, is being sort of seen as harmless and non-threatening. And then that's actually how they get their victims. And it's comes from the kind of a more of a pathetic, needy place where they're really getting their needs met through the children, like even on a more emotional level with the act of the child. It's like this intimacy, like it's really sort of different than these kind of really vicious, sadistic, pedo-sadistic kind of, you know, Satanists that are just, you know, like violently taking what they want. It's a little bit different. I don't know if that kind of explains. So I think everyone on the spectrum kind of would fall on one of those two sides, and maybe they could go back and forth depending on their environment or situation. But I think those two categories are kind of stand out for the types.
So when you were talking, I was thinking about grooming, right? So the non-Satanist pedophile would basically take the time to groom a child into being able to pedophile that child. And you have said it before that narcissists also groom their victims. So
Right.
So let's talk about those two, how those things are the same or parallel.
Right. And that's a lot of the thrill for them, right? And so like the Satanists will just they'll breed people, they'll take them, they'll torture them from birth. They don't need the child to sort of be groomed and come in willingly. They just take it and program it from birth. And I'm only calling it because that's how they're seeing that person, as as a thing, as an object to be programmed and molded like clay into whatever they want. And then so the other one, the groomer, you know, that for them, that is a lot of the thrill, because they actually, and this is with maybe a narcissist in dating, or with the grooming, like they're grooming people they're dating too, or they're grooming people to come and work for them for a job, or like however they're going to lure you into being in a position of them having kind of control over you, whether it's overt or covert control, which is even more dangerous if you don't realize that they're manipulating you. That the grooming process for them is really part of the thrill seeking. It's what makes them feel superior to you, is to lure you in and groom you, and to make you kind of agree to a false thing they're presenting, because then they're never really vulnerable, because they're putting on a mask and then they're grooming in with the mask. And so they always have the upper hand because they're never really vulnerable. And so it is very similar to how they would groom children. And I mean, obviously children are really easy targets because they don't have the life experience or the intelligence, or, you know, they can't look at the hidden agendas of adults. And so it's really so pathetic that these people, you know, are grooming children because they're just easy targets, right? But with adults, I mean, they do the same thing. It's very similar.
So that led me to think about, I mean, there's a whole lot of incest in our society, like in families.
Mhm.
So would
Mhm.
the offending parent then probably be a narcissist? And
Yeah.
there's okay, go ahead and talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, this is just my opinion. I'm not saying every academic or whatever would agree with me, but like from what I've researched, like I wouldn't think it would be possible without that. Like, because again, they see that whether it's their own child or a stepchild, and I don't want to say the wrong stats, but there's a pretty high correlation between stepchildren and sexual abuse, and it's still incest because it's an authority figure, and you're coming in as a father figure, and that's how they're snaking into the position to take advantage, and that's the only way they actually can take advantage is to abuse the like invert the authority parental father or mother. I mean, there's females too, but it's mostly the stepfather's like kind of the number one statistic for getting in that situation because there's not that kind of biological sort of genetic connection to kind of prevent somebody from doing that to their children. Although people do it to their own biological children as well, there seems to be something kind of in the genetics that there's something that kind of stops it genetically. But yeah, so the people that come in and do that, they really invert the roles is basically how they would come in and groom. And I don't think they would do that unless they had a sense of entitlement that person is a part of their property. And so we know that narcissists just see their own children as an extension of themselves. So they feel perfectly entitled to utilize that child for whatever need or urge they would have. They wouldn't feel any shame about that at all.
Yeah, so I mean, because I have a child, and there's this deep love that you have for your child and this innate wanting to protect them against all harm. So what happens to someone who would abuse their own child? Like so what happens to that personality, that instinct is gone?
Yeah, again, it's that these people are fractured too, and that's not to make any type of justification or excuse. I'm only trying to explain their behavior, never excuse or justify it. But they are fragmented, even if it's that they're dissociative, not from what they're doing or like with full knowledge, but like they may actually just be cut off from their guilt and their shame or these kind of mechanisms that we would have that would stop us from doing something like empathy or we have certain things in our makeup that prevent us from wanting to do these things like biologically, right? So when those are not working, it's because something's been fractured off. And humans have sort of feedback loops, right? So and this is basically how SRA is done, is pushing somebody to a maximum and then they kind of snap and have a new blank slate, right? And so with human beings, it's really the most shame-filled people that start to act shameless because they're so shameful that their mind literally just disconnects from shame because it gets to that cutoff point, right? So when you see people acting really shameless, it's actually because they are so shame-filled, but it just gets put in a box and thrown away. And this is something they do, and they know how to do really intentionally with SRA and programming. But I mean, for somebody to be able to do that to their own children, it comes from a very deep psychic fracturing within themselves. And then there's also a lot of projection. So like a lot of times pedophiles will project things onto the children, like that the child was acting seductive, or they'll take the lack of resistance as a form of consent, which is totally just something they're making up in their own mind that they want to be true. That's actually not true because that's just not the way it works. And a lot of children don't actually feel the ability to say no, especially if they've been like spanked or had adults have authority in their body in other ways, like even medical figures or teachers, or like if they're taught that they don't have the right to say no on their body, like on one thing, they won't even know that they have the right to say that on another thing. So that lack of resistance is not consent ever, but pedophiles will often like justify and rationalize based on that. And also children can normally do dissociate, so when they're saying like the child didn't react, it's like the child probably wasn't even there anymore in their body.
Yeah, I can attest to that. When those things happened to me, I was just not, you go somewhere else because it's too much. And when you're talking, it's interesting because my mother, as we've said before, is a big narcissist. And she molested me as well. But I believe she was part of the cult in some way as well, and was done to herself because she was very sexualized. And I remember her as a young, 30 something mom, she would unbutton her shirt all the way down, and she was always flirty, and she was always very kind of loose in that way. And even as an adult, I remember I was out at dinner with some friends. She had come to visit, and at a restaurant, at a dinner table, she basically just grabbed one of my breasts, but she was doing it as if it were funny, like ha ha ha, your breasts are a little bigger or something. And so like very inappropriate, and all her siblings, my aunts and uncles, were very inappropriate that way. They would comment on my body. They would come and open the bathroom door when I was taking a shower and look. So anyway, so what do you think about it? It was just this multi-layer, but my mother was also always dissociated. So I think when she abused, maybe she was in a different altar. I'm not sure. But then the narcissism was very much there. I was not myself. I was whatever I was to her.
Yeah, exactly. It's that projection, right? And you're an object, and they're projecting onto the object whatever they need that object to be to reenact whatever urge they have, even if it's from their own subconscious. So there's kind of different layers of like a couple of things you just said, but yeah, usually, especially with generational families, the parents will be dissociative, and like you'll hear a lot of stories of people talking about like their parents' eyes changing, and like even to the level of possession, and so again on that continuum, but it's like a different person doing it, and then the person would just act like nothing happened and like switch back, right? And then so the child kind of learns to adapt to that as well, which is something they teach in generational families, because when the parents dissociative, the children become more dissociative by proxy, because they need to flip alters to match whatever alter their parents in, right? So it kind of all works together to keep the whole generational stuff going like clockwork. But yeah, like so for them to be doing that, like there's that histrionic personality disorder as well, right? Which is like very a good thing for people to familiarize themselves with, because it's pretty connected to narcissism. They kind of go hand in hand. It's that just using sexuality to get the attention that somebody needs. And like normally a lot of people that are histrionic like can be quite childlike and immature as well, because it is like that inner child trying to get attention. But like it probably a lot of the times I would say it is maybe a sign of sexual abuse when somebody is very like histrionic or overtly sexual. Like I've met people like that before, where it's like they're just flirting with everyone, and it's just kind of like their only way to really kind of get this need met inside of them. But I mean, to me, that's really would be like an indicator of sexual abuse in childhood, if that's the only way that somebody knows how to really get the feeling that they consider love, right?
Yeah. And you mentioned, like young. And so you and I have discussed this before. You've sent me videos of like adults in diapers and like baby onesies sucking their thumb. So it seems like the pedophile narcissist kind of type is super infantilized or not, there's something going on there with that.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I didn't want to forget to talk about this on this podcast, because it's and again, this is just my theory. Some people might not agree with this, but like I really feel that a lot of pedophilia is caused from the rejection of a person's own inner child. And so when they're fragmented from their own inner child, and they've rejected that, which again we talked about is kind of what narcissism develops out of, right? And so when somebody becomes a narcissist, and because it's developed, narcissism, true narcissistic personality disorder, like I said, we all have narcissistic traits on a spectrum, and it can be circumstantial or environmental. When you have the actual personality disorder, as in that's who you are, how you were formed, you're never going to change. That happens really, really young, and it is from that inner child being fractured off. So when that's fractured off, then you're attracted to what you've rejected inside of yourself, right? And so that's with narcissism, but also with the pedophilia. And so again, when you're just talking about SRA or like Satanists using pedophilia as a means to an end, that's just about power and control, which could maybe be fetishized. Like they can sexualize that power and control. But like when somebody's like actually attracted to children, it's because there's an emotional attraction. And even with adults, when we're attracted to people for dating or whatever, it's actually an emotional resonance. Even though a lot of people think it's physical, it's actually not. It's actually the emotional resonance which causes people to be attracted to each other. And so, and then we can kind of like, it can go with the physical, but if that emotional resonance isn't there, and so you'll see a lot of couples when they fight, they're really at the same emotional level most of the time, or they'll end up breaking up because that emotional resonance needs to somehow like match. And so when somebody becomes a narcissist and rejects their inner child, then they truly are attracted to those children, and those are the ones that are like actually getting their emotional needs met. They want to play with the kids, and they're really being a little child with that child, and then sexualizing it. So it's like this other really twisted thing. But yeah, I think that's one of the key things actually about pedophilia. And I think that if people had a healthy way to process that part of their shadow, like where they could realize that there would be a way to have a relationship and that love without the sexual element. But because in our society, like especially with men, but they're trying to push it on everybody now, even children, they're trying to really like push sex into everything so that there can't be intimacy without sex. And so, and especially men, because they've been so programmed to like not show emotion and stuff, the only way they can really express themselves is sexually. That's the only way they're really allowed to express themselves and still be considered manly, right? Like more than sitting and talking or whatever. But that's really dangerous, because then, you know, they might just feel like this love for the child, but then they only know how to express that. And like I said, it's so connected in their mind that like they twist it into this sexual thing, and that's not okay. And that can't happen. That's not okay for anybody ever. And it's like something that I think maybe needs to be separated out a little bit to maybe combat some of the pedophilia problem in our society.
That's interesting. That might explain why it seems to me that I've observed that pedophiles will be attracted to a specific age, and that's usually an age when they themselves were traumatized.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So that would kind of explain that.
Yeah. And, you know, there's kind of this misconception that, you know, anybody that's been a victim of a pedophile is going to grow up to be a pedophile because of that mechanism I just described, where they repress, they cut off their inner child, and then they can't help projecting and being attracted out. And that can happen, right? And that's okay. Like that's involuntary. It's not the person's fault if something happened to them when they're a child and they repressed it, and then they have these kind of weird impulses coming up because it's connected in their subconscious mind. That's how the subconscious mind works. It connects things together. It anchors them together. So if something happened to you, it's like you really can't help those things being anchored. However, we are spiritual beings that aren't just animals. And so we have the ability to actually use the reasoning logic center of our brain to override those impulses. But the time that we are not able to control our impulses is when we deny them, right? And when we deny them and we won't look at them, that's when they control us from the subconscious. And I think that's actually how some of the abused people replicate their abuse, because they weren't able to process it. And so it's like it becomes an impulse in them, right? And then it gets reenacted in a distorted way. And I also feel that one of the ways to deal with the pedophilia problem in our society is to let go of the shame of those associations, because they're involuntary. It's not your fault. Something happened to you when you're 5, and then you see a 5-year-old and it re-triggers that part of your brain. That's not your fault. But if you have the courage to have that introspection and say, I'm noticing this in myself. And if you were able to work with a therapist and say, like, I'm noticing these things connected in my mind, and you could come and bring them up to the light and talk about them and process them without the shame, just it is what it is. I've noticed an association. I feel like that actually may be a helpful therapy for people that would be able to do that if they could just at that point. But when people feel shame about it and repress it and deny it, then it gets, that's the repetition compulsion, right? And that's what gets it reenacted. So that's what I think is really dangerous in that kind of area.
Yeah, no, and thank you for saying that, because I think all pedophiles have been molested. I'm going to say that, but not all people who have been molested become pedophiles, you know.
Right. Actually, most don't.
Most don't, right? I think the statistics was that I know of was like 11% do. So that's most don't. Right. that's yeah, 90% don't.
Right.
It's interesting for me, having gone through, well, satanic ritual abuse, but pedophilia as well. What I noticed is when I had my daughter is a constant fear that something was going to happen to her. And I would also, even before that, like if I would see a dad with a little girl or a man with a little girl anywhere in the cafe or anything, I would start to become very anxious and wonder if that girl was kidnapped, if he was raping her. So like I saw it everywhere. So that was my, like you said, that association, right? So my
Mm-hmm.
association. And then when I had my own daughter, like a constant fear and anxiety, like if I leave her at school, will something happen to her? If she goes out, like there's still, I mean, even still today, it's much better, but there's like this fear that if she's somewhere on her own and I'm not around, I mean, I know that's delusional, but somehow I'm not around to watch and protect her, that somehow she's going to be victimized. So that's something I've had to really work on because, that's not a very helpful state to be in all the time. But that's kind of how it happened for me.
Mm-hmm. And that's really normal. And like you did that work to look at it, pull it up, take a look at it, put it on the table and, say, this is what's happening. Why is this happening? Like, what is this connected to? And like, that's the healing work that will, not that it's not always going to be there, but you're looking at it from up here instead of being right in it every time it happens. Right. And so I think if like, that's a really good skill for all people to learn, right. Is to just really be able to like, notice when those things are so heavily connected and we all have them. We all have those traumas. Like every person has certain things that are, bringing the past into the present. And, it's really that courage to heal. And I love the book Courage to Heal. I know that book is a little bit controversial, but like, I think it's an amazing book and I read it and I recommend it. And I love the title of it because it's really the courage to heal. Right. And so when people won't look at their own trauma, that's when it gets reenacted. And, with this, the pedophilia is so bad on our planet. Like, it's like we're literally living on like a planet that has this like virus of pedophilia that's just like taken over so many people and is like replicating itself by abusing and repressing. And then that person reenacts it. And it's like this, like, it's just gone on this like weird replication, like where we need to just like really kind of expose it and have the courage to look at it. And I know a lot of people are really devastated with all the pedophilia stuff that's come out. And I mean, the ripple effect of the pedophilia, it really, I mean, is the worst thing you can do to a child. Like it will take their life on a completely different course than it would have been if it didn't happen. But it also ripples out and affects all society, all through history. Like even 100 years from now, people that are reading books about the pedophilia that happen to kids now, it's still going to hurt people to even learn about it in the future because that's how horrible and wrong it is in our universe, right? Yeah. So I think that courage to heal is the courage. And right now, even though it's so horrible how much is coming out, I feel like we're being given that opportunity right now where it's being exposed and we just have to have the courage to heal it and to look at it. And it's going to be a big job because it's a really horrible mess to clean up. But right now is the opportunity that we have to deal with it as humanity.
I 100% agree with you. And it does take courage to heal. I did a 10-year deep dive healing process, and it's really painful because to really get through that trauma, you walled it off because it was too much. So you have to unpack it, like unpacking a suitcase, and then you have to see it and feel it and smell it and know it. And it's traumatic. So, you can do it better as an adult. You can handle that trauma. As a child, you couldn't, which is why you packed it up and put it away, right? And so it does take that willingness to confront those traumas, whatever they are, and to feel them and understand what kind of subconscious beliefs you formed around that and how it twisted you. And then, let it go and heal it. But I would say the reward for doing that is inner freedom and like knowing yourself and having choice, because when you're traumatized and you haven't dealt with it, everything that happens in the present will hit something and take a person back to the past, and then you're always reacting. and you're never really choosing your thoughts, choosing your behavior, choosing, your response. So it's I think that doing that kind of work is a difference between personal freedom and literally being a slave to the trauma.
Yeah, it really owns you when you're in it. Like you're not separate from
Yes.
it. You're just in it. Whereas like if you can get above it, then you're looking at it as something outside of yourself that happened to you. It's not you. It's not who you are. It's not, you're not identified
Right.
with it as your being. It's like this was something, this was a series of events that happened to you. So it's a very different way to be experiencing things, and it gives you a lot more power. But our kind of mechanisms in our brain is to just kind of avoid painful things. Like that's what's the pleasure pain reward principle, right? So people just think, oh, if I just avoid that, or and there's been such a culture of codependence with abusers. And I'm not letting codependents off the hook, because I know codependents always want to seem nice and like they don't like conflict, and they want to just sweep everything under the rug and not hold anybody accountable, and just this blanket forgiveness of everyone, and let's just move forward and make it work, and never really look at the skeletons in the closet. And that looks really nice on the outside, but abusers cannot function without people like that surrounding them. And right now in society, like when I think about a sexual abuse family, sexual abuse happens in a system. Okay. So it's not just an abuser going and abusing one person. They have to seduce the parents. They have to groom the parents. They have to get children into their classroom. They have to get children into their homes. There's this whole grooming that goes of all of society, and it happens in a system, and it can't happen without people looking the other way, disregarding things that didn't seem to line up about the person, disregarding their own intuition in their solar plexus, disregarding what the child's trying to tell them directly or indirectly. And I'm kind of more hardcore. Like I don't let people like that off the hook anymore, because I think wanting to be seen as nice is really selfish and actually narcissistic. And I think it's hiding your own narcissism to come across as that person and then blaming the abuser. And we've just seen that in the sexual abuse family, especially with the kind of typical like 1950s marriage, where everything's just, let's just keep, let's always make the family look nice on the outside and never pull up the garbage. And, people kind of got away with that for a while, and it kind of worked, but it's not working anymore. And this stuff is exploding. It's been swept under the rug, and it's like there's nowhere else to sweep anything anymore. It's coming out all the sides. So our only choice now is to like lift up the rug and actually go clean it out and look at what's under that rug. And I feel like that's what's happening in society right now globally. I feel like the shadows being exposed, the rug's been lifted up, and there's all kinds of like dust bunnies under there that like we need to like all go in and clean, and putting the rug back down is just not going to work at this point.
Yeah, no. When we talk about the satanic elite and their use of pedophilia, they've always they've always operated in secrecy and deception, right? So, but nowadays, that same group of people, and I do believe that more light has come in, and the darkness is just being exposed. And so they're not hiding it anymore. I'm pretty sure you've probably seen that publication that the WHO and the UN put out, where they literally say that children are sexual from birth, that they should have sexual partners as soon as possible, that by kindergarten, they should learn masturbation, oral sex, anal sex, intercourse, same-sex relationships, that they deserve to have access to online pornography, et cetera, right? Now, this is a directive coming out from these global bodies. I mean, I don't know how much more blatant it gets than that. And UNESCO, as part of the UN, the part that tells education systems globally what they should teach, we see it here in the US. I don't know how it is in Canada where you are, or, other places at this point, but here in the US, it's really bad. They are teaching, I mean, the books that parents are finding that their kindergartners are reading, or their elementary school kids, it's basically 100% pornography. And then, you add in the gender stuff, boys can be girls, all that kind of stuff. But I want to talk about the sexualization, because so now in society, we are actively, openly grooming children to accept pedophilia, to become sexualized, which ruins their their brain, but also we're obviously grooming adults to think that this is okay for children. So I'd love to hear I know you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's like it's like everybody's grooming each other at this point. Like it's just, we need to break the chain. Like it's just crazy. Canada is, it's probably worse in the States. I'm not sure. They're all bad.
I think it's
I just
worse,
think of the
yeah.
human family. I think of the human family, and when I think about this sexual abuse family, like the family system, right? That it, like, and it's really a narcissistic family system that allows for pedophilia to occur, right? And when I think of the human family and I think about all the enablers and the codependents and the people that are going along with the grooming and like literally sacrificing their own children in order to be liked and seen as nice. And in Canada, we're known for being nice. We're always nice. Like I wanted to write some stuff up about the difference between being a good person and a nice person, because I think people really need to get over wanting to be seen as nice as a virtue, because being nice actually isn't a virtue. A lot of times being nice is really cowardly. And seeing this with like teachers going in and teaching this garbage to children right now because they want to be seen as the nice, go along to get along, like, totally being an enabler of actual pure satanic evil, whether you're religious or not. Like, I mean, I'm not letting people off the hook anymore, especially teachers at this point. Like, you guys are supposed to be nice, good people. You guys are supposed to be role models. Like, if this isn't a breaking point for you and you want to keep your job and you're going to go in and teach stuff to children and you don't want to get involved, you're like, to me, that's like, I'm not letting people off the hook at this point. I don't think the universe is either. And when I think of our family, our human family, I think of, this lady, JJ Freed, and I don't know if people all know who she is, but her parents actually started the False Memory Society Foundation because she was actually taking her parents to court for doing ritual abuse and sexually abusing her. And JJ Freed's really smart. I believe she's a university professor in psychology, and she has a PhD, and she took her parents to court. She didn't let them off the hook. She held them accountable. And their only recourse was actually Pamela Freed, and I can't remember her father's name, went and started the False Memory Foundation with some other psychologists who are probably all programmers, I would say, is pretty fair to say.
They were
especially like Elizabeth. Yeah, especially Elizabeth Loftus and all of them, right? Yes. Like, so that was their only recourse, was to try and cover up what had been exposed. But anyways, I just like to bring up JJ Freed because I think she's an amazing human being that's really inspiring and did not step down, even though she had like really smart academics all basically coming up with theories and societies against her just for speaking the truth. But some of her really important work is on betrayal trauma. And in dealing with betrayal trauma, there's something called betrayal blindness. And so betrayal blindness is a mechanism in the mind where people start blocking out reality in order to keep a relationship that they feel they need to survive. And so when somebody feels they need a relationship in order to survive, they'll start minimizing evidence right in front of their eyes. And so we've all kind of been through this when you start dating somebody and you really like them and you just block out everything that you don't, that isn't good about them because you really want to be with them, right? And then when you break up, it's like those exact things are so clear in your mind. It's like those things go to the back and the other things come to the front, and you're like, wow, like now I see it, right? But you can't when you really think you need that relationship. And so this happens on kind of all levels of society. It happens at, people taking abuse at their job. It happens when people don't want to get out of a marriage. And so I think it's really, really key to understand how betrayal blindness works, because it happens in interpersonal relationships, but it also happens on a societal level. And when I see all these people right now that don't want to, go get another career when they're later in life because they've been teaching forever or whatever, or they're a nurse, or they're, all these people that have all this investment in their identity as a role they're playing in society. And then there's like this dialectic going on where it's like so obviously like immoral at this point to continue to do what they're doing, but they feel that they need that relationship. And a lot of people feel like they need the relationship with the government and these authority figures. And whatever institution they're working in, they feel like they need that relationship to survive. So they have betrayal blindness. They're literally blocking out this information. And right now it's just a dialectic of where's that tipping point,
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And, because pedophilia is basically undergirds the entire society that we live in, or the matrix, as some people call it, this is by design. So, for example, some survivors go into MK Ultra or SRA because it starts out that their families are, molesting them and maybe filming them, the child rape for child porn. But the system, when somebody's alerted, like the FBI or CPS, the system actually rewards the perpetrator. So often, in Kathy O'Brien's story, for example, her father gets discovered, for his making child pornography. But instead of being punished, he said they tell him, well, if you give us your daughter for MK Ultra purposes and to traffic among politicians, then we'll actually give you money and you can keep doing what you're doing. So that's just to say this whole system that we live in creates, supports, and maintains pedophilia constantly, right? So we have to understand that to sort of understand the lower levels of what's going on. But I absolutely agree with what you're saying, and I recently interviewed Mark Passio, and we were talking, and he says something which I fully agree with. So I've said this too, basically those elites, those psychopath, pedophile, Satanists that run the world, they will do this. This is their thing, right? But they can't successfully do this without the 99+% of us being either apathetic, complying, or like you're saying, being nice, being codependent. So the real problem is the people that will not step up and say no to this agenda. And we could have argued in the past, a few decades ago, that, well, people don't know. This is like really well hidden and well executed. But today, I don't think there's any excuse for not knowing.
Thank you for watching the first part of this interview. Due to censorship, we cannot play the rest of this on YouTube. In the comments below, you will find links to our website, Unbroken.Global, and BitChute to watch in full. Thank you.